murder of Alison Baden Clay.
Alison's husband, Jared, had rang police and said, my wife's gone for a walk and she hasn't come home, and I'm concerned about where she is. When they got there, he was very aloof. They noticed some scratch marks on his face. 11 days, we had a fellow that was kayaking up off a tribute off the Brisbane River in Colo Creek, and that's when he was the one that discovered Alison's body. And what put the icing on the cake for us is we engaged a botanist who was a leading botanist in Queensland, because when Alison was found, she had bits of foliage in her hair. He was able to examine that foliage and determine the types of plant material that was. And interestingly, when we went back to the Baden Clay house, each one of those plants were at the rear of the house. He thought he could outsmart us, but his biggest mistake, again, we're talking about circumstantial evidence, was inquiries to the insurance company to see what Alison's life insurance policy was worth.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with retired Detective Superintendent Mark Ainsworth. Welcome back, Mark.
Thanks, Gary.
Again, even during the break, I was thinking about the stuff that you were talking about, youth crime. So it's given me a lot of thoughts on different approaches. What I want to talk about now, and I think it'll lead us into another topic of domestic violence and issues across the country happening. But there was a high-profile murder investigation that you oversaw, and that was the murder of Alison Baden Clay in 2012, I believe it was.
That's correct. Yes. Yep.
Can you tell our listeners about that crime, just how it started and about the investigation, just the breakdown of what happened?
No problems. I was actually started on the Saturday as back in the Marola as the Regional Crime Coordinator, Detective Superintendent. I'd been on holidays, and that Friday afternoon I got a phone call, my last day of leave, that we'd had this missing person that looked a bit suspicious. So Saturday morning, I've gone into where our major incident room was set up and got the details. The whole investigative team were there, and we started a full-blown major incident room. And in conjunction with that, we had a forward command post set up in the Brookfield Showgrounds where we had people searching for Alison. Basically, how it started was on the Friday morning. Alison's husband, Jared, had rang police and said, my wife's gone for a walk and she hasn't come home, and I'm concerned about where she is. Uniformed police attended his place and did a sensational job. When they got there, he was very aloof. They noticed some scratch marks on his face, which he said that, there was a razor cut. He spoke about an extramarital affair that he had to the uniformed police. The uniformed police called their supervisor, who called the CIB, who attended the scene. And from the great work initially from the uniform officers, full major incident room was set up. The house that Jared was in was declared a crime scene, and we held that crime scene for a week to allow the forensic officers to do a thorough investigation.
So, Mark, can I just interrupt? And it's great you're relaying how it happened, but with the uniform guys going there, did they, or guys and girls, did they? Was there something suspicious about him from the start that didn't feel like it added up? What was he saying, that his wife just went for a walk and she hasn't returned? How long had she been missing for?
She'd only gone, what he claimed was she got up and went for a walk every morning at 6 o'clock. At this particular day, she was to go to a real estate convention down the Gold Coast, and he was concerned that she hadn't come home from her walk.
So what time of day was that?
It was around, from memory, around 7 a.m. or a little bit before 7 a.m.
Right.
He told the police that he'd been out driving around trying to find her. He'd been trying to ring her mobile phone, no answer, and it was totally out of character for her to disappear under those circumstances. The big thing that raised the suspicion of the uniform was the scratches on his face.
Yeah.
Him talking about an extramarital affair. And that was their big suspicions, and just his general demeanour.
What are we talking about with the scratches? How significant were they?
They were very significant, the scratches. Like it looked like if his claim was true, the razor blade was certainly out of control. It left massive big scratches, and as depicted in media, down the side of his face there. Very much inconsistent with the razor cut.
And then talking about the extramarital affair that he had, it's like he's going on the offensive, putting the defence up straight away. Like, if you dig deep, you're going to find this. So he told the police there when he's reporting his wife missing.
100%. There was just a range of scenarios that raised their suspicion, which forced them to contact the local detectives.
I'm just putting my sort of homicide hat on too, and like at 7 a.m. or go for a work at 6 a.m. and it was pretty quick that he's called the police. Hasn't phoned anyone else, and it's red flags there.
As the investigation started, there were a number of other phone calls, and one of those was to his lawyer. Now, if your wife or partner had gone missing, would you be ringing your lawyer straight up? No.
Yeah.
The other one was checks on the Fifth Amendment's right to silence. So there was red flags once the investigation started, from the minute he jumped on the phone to reporting it to the police, all the way through.
Okay. Now, you said the place was set up as a crime scene. Was anything found in the crime scene?
No, there was 3 vehicles there. We seized all the vehicles for crime scene examination. In the house, there was no evidence of tissues or anything which would be consistent for a razor cut, the blood, anything like that. And inside the house was pretty much unremarkable from a crime scene point of view. As it transpired later on, there was a white Captiva, which was only, I think from memory, was 8 weeks old. That was the car that Alison was driving. And as the investigation progressed, that came up some significant evidence. In that regard, what happened was a full scientific examination was done of the car, and there was bloodstains found in the rear driver's side area against a metal clip, which is used for clipping seats back in. The examination of that showed blood coming from that clip running down in a downward direction. And as the investigation progressed, that was identified through DNA as being Alison's blood. Interestingly, in the back of that car was a number of kids' toys that were stacked neatly in the back of the car. When we interviewed a housekeeper, she said those toys have never been removed from underneath the house for a number of months because the kids had outgrown them. They were in the car. So that as the investigation progressed along, Alison's body was found, and it was found in an area.
Sorry, Mark. Just on that, what was I would imagine there would have been the inquiries about the relationships they had. Was there any issues with the relationships? Had there been any history of violence? And looking at the husband, who I think it would be fair to say was a suspect right from the start. Was there anything else that jumped out in those inquiries that added to the suspicion?
The big thing that really jumped out was his lawyer attending and saying, "My client will not be answering any questions." Now,
interesting.
Is that a normal advice or normal behaviour if your partner just gone for a walk? So that part was significant. There was no history of domestic violence on any police database at that address or with the people involved. Gerard was in the Kenmore Chamber of Commerce and pretty much respected amongst the business people in the area. He ran a local real estate agent, not a very successful one, as we later found out. So that was very interesting from the word go. Look, even suggestions were made to his lawyer along the lines, look, Gerard's had an argument with Alison and he's done something, dreadful. Now's the time to tell us.
Yeah.
But no, just will not be cooperating. And that was all the way through, right, even up to the end of the trial.
Did he go on TV? And I seem to have a recollection of him going on TV and making an appeal for the public to
certainly. He certainly did. When on the Saturday morning, we kicked off the major incident room. We'd spoken to him about doing an appeal for Alison if she's out there to come forward. He refused to do that. Putting up Jeff and Priscilla, Alison's parents, to do that appeal for Alison to come home, or anyone had any information to come forward. I think, the significant public interest in the matter, the media kept hounding Gerard and his sister and family to
Yeah.
the point that he decided to make a public appeal. But that was off his own back, nothing to do with any request from police.
Right.
And we were made aware of it, obviously, by the media that he'd
Yeah.
made a little appearance.
A few crocodile tears there.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. So, just giving people that an understanding, how many staff did you have working on that investigation, and what was the breakdown of the investigative team? And was it you call it a strike force name?
was a task force.
Yeah.
Um, it was two separate parts. In the initial part, Alison, we had to try and locate her. So the Brookfield Showgrounds was probably about 500 metres from her house, where he
Right.
claimed she'd left to go for a walk. We had a forward command post there with searches involving multiple police. We had recruits from the academy, a lot of gold mines around that area. So we had expertise from the local council, SES searching for her, and that search went for 11 days. So we've got full on there every single day. Alison's parents were at that place.
Yeah.
His parents, Gerard did not turn up there. At the same time as running that, we had the major incident room, which involved probably at its peak, probably 40 detectives following things through. We were getting a lot of information. I think in total, 1,500 pieces of information from Crime Stoppers came in. Every single piece of that information was run out. Also, at the time, there was electronic surveillance and physical surveillance being undertaken, and examination of computers and mobile phones.
Yeah. The magnitude of an investigation like that, and there's red flags that you guys have picked up right from the start. But red flags are one thing. It's about gathering the evidence that you got sufficient evidence to charge him. With the incident room running like that, the search over 11 days, was it 11 days that Alison's body was found? Was that?
Yes, 11 days. We had a fellow that was kayaking up off a tribute off the Brisbane River in Colo Creek, and that's when he was the one that discovered Alison's body on the mud banks there.
And what the crime scene set up there? What was revealed about Alison's body?
It had been there for the duration.
Yeah.
What had happened as part of the investigation, we set up a time-lapse camera because it was tidal, that part of the creek, and where the body was dumped, that was above the high tide mark. So I think that was one mistake that Gerard made when he dumped Alison's body, that he couldn't even get the tides right. Had she ended up in the tides there, and the Brisbane River tribute was about 200 metres away, the body could have ended up anywhere.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, during the period of time we're looking for her, we had quite an array of weather patterns. There's a lot of rain, very hot days. So the body was very much decomposed, and from that decomposition, we were not able to obtain any sufficient evidence like fingernail scratches or skin or anything under the fingernails. We sent away some samples of bone to a professor in Western Australia to see whether or not he could determine whether there was any consistency with drowning or death beforehand. That came back that there's no evidence of drowning. We never had a cause of death because of the decomposition, which was a bit of a challenge in moving forward to charge, as you'd be aware of. But during the investigation, we talked earlier about the teamwork, and I relied solely on my detective senior sergeant and the crew. And I must say they were absolutely brilliant, from the investigators, from the scenes of crime people, from everyone that had any involvement. The commitment and dedication was second to none. You've got a mother that's gone missing. At that stage, she had 3 young girls. I think they were about 8, 6 and 4. Hadn't seen their mother. The father, is a suspect in our eyes, and his behaviour was a bit erratic shortly after she went missing. And it really motivated police to really dig in.
I can picture what it would be like, the dynamics of an investigation of that nature, and the way you describe it, and the suspicions attached. Obviously, jump up. Calling the police after an hour, solicitor, an affair, scratch marks, and that. It's circumstantial evidence. It's enough to add a suspicion. You've recovered the body, but that's not revealing much. There's still so much work to do, and it needs the attention to detail. So you had a detective senior sergeant running the team?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
And then 40 or so at different times on the investigation. How long did the investigation run before there was a serious discussion about whether we've got sufficient evidence to charge him?
Right up until the 13th of June is when we went and picked him up and charged him.
So what's that? 2 months? Just under 2
Yeah,
months.
just under 2 months. And it was that morning we put a strategy into place, and at that morning, after our strategy ran out, we made a determination to arrest him at that stage. There was a lot of toing and froing between people a little bit more senior to me, giving advice that you haven't got a cause of death, how are you going to charge? The usual experts coming in that have no involvement in it with their opinion. But the team we had 23 pieces of circumstantial evidence, and we were 100% committed that we had sufficient to charge. And what put the icing on the cake for us is during this investigation, as we said before, in your briefings, you get information or you get suggestions from that team. And we engaged a botanist who was a leading botanist in Queensland, because when Alison was found, she had bits of foliage in her hair. He was able to examine that foliage and determine the types of plant material that was.
Yep.
And interestingly, when we went back to the Baden Clay house, each one of those plants were at the rear of the house. And significantly, there was a cat's claw, I think it was called, which was dangling over the back of the garage near where the Captiva had been parked. So when he lifted Alison up to put her in the back of that Captiva, the cat claw had caught into her hair.
Right.
The work of that botanist was absolutely significant. And really, we're talking about circumstantial evidence, but that was really high-level circumstantial evidence that he came up with. Fortunate for us, the botanist lived in that vicinity of that area.
Yep.
And he knew the area like the back of his hand, and there was no other pieces of foliage that was found in her hair anywhere in the near vicinity of where she was found. So his evidence was significant.
I can see why that would have been a exciting moment, getting that piece of evidence and linking it. But again, that's the attention to detail, and I think you mentioned 23 pieces of circumstantial evidence. When you look at circumstantial evidence, like on its own, it doesn't really paint a picture. But when you add them all up together and you sit down and look at them, and it's interesting you were talking about the decision to charge or not, because sometimes that's the hardest part of being a homicide detective. That okay, let's break it down. What have we got here? And you're looking and you think it's one thing to think a person's done a crime. It's another thing to be able to prove that person has done a crime. I can imagine there would have been the naysayers. There always is when you're trying to make decisions, whether that comes from above or below. There's always, it's a robust decision to make. You guys obviously felt as a team that there was sufficient evidence to charge. When he was arrested, what was his attitude? I would imagine someone like that would still be denying it.
Yeah, 100%, Gary. He was still denying it. He called his solicitor up, wouldn't talk to us. Look, he was a bloke that was full of his own self-importance and thought he could beat everything, but he stuffed up a few ways along the line.
Yeah.
One is that we had an order, a forensic order, to get samples and everything off him. Because we'd seized his vehicles on the way to the police station, he drove into a shopping centre wall. No evidence of any breaking. On the front page in the front seat of the car was page 3, a big article about Alison. He got a few minor injuries from that accident, but we were able to use that to our benefit in that we had a full mental health assessment of him done at the hospital, which, as you're aware, can be quite important later on if he wants to make that claim and is deemed to be of sound mind. So there's that part of it. He took himself to a local doctor a couple of days after Alison disappeared, informing the doctor, I'd like, the police want me to have a look at these razor cuts on my face.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Gerard, that doctor had examined about 500 razor biopsies during a training period as part of a project, and she was clearly able to say they weren't consistent.
Yeah.
Interestingly, this is only a couple of days after he's left his business card with the doctor and said, if you want to catch up for a coffee, I'd be interested.
Wow.
During the physical examination we conducted of him, there was other scratches and wounds on his chest. He said they were caused by a caterpillar the day before Alison's disappearance, when the girls were running in a cross country. So we found the area where that was, where he claimed this killer caterpillar had got onto him, and we got a caterpillar expert to that area, along with the botanist, to determine if there were any caterpillars in that area and what sort they were. Interestingly, there was no caterpillars that would cause that sort of injury, so we were able to knock that down. We found evidence on his laptop of an extramarital affair with a woman there, and they were communicating covertly on that laptop, which led us to tracking her down. She was very, very staunch with Gerard until we threatened her with arrest, and she decided to cough up a full story.
Yep.
Everything we put in place and tried, he thought he could outsmart us, but his biggest mistake, again, we're talking about circumstantial evidence, was inquiries to the insurance company to see what Alison's life insurance policy was worth. And that was prior to her disappearing. And I think that was around, from memory, the 14th or 15th of April. The day that we located Alison, that afternoon, a further inquiry was made by him in relation to the life insurance policy. Yeah, so it was the circumstantial evidence, but the big thing that was very important in this, and the whole world was watching it, the 45 days that this matter was in the paper, and it was Queensland, New South Wales, Queensland, Australia, and internationally interest in it. We did a peer review of every section of the investigation to make sure we were 100% accurate. Yeah. And fortunately, we did that. So toxicology came back at a decimal point in relation to a substance, antidepressant in Alison's body, had been put in the wrong place. We had that piece of information reviewed by a toxicology expert in Victoria who corrected it, which was substantial. So the critical part of the peer review, I think, really gave us a lot of confidence in moving forward with charging.
And Mark, on that, and I like the idea of peer reviews and investigations I've been involved in. We've had that type of thing to have a look, because sometimes you're in it, you're looking, and sometimes you need other people to have a look and cross-check everything you've got. Because these type of mistakes, and you talk decimal point or whatever, if you went to trial, and I'm surmising here, so we're talking hypothetically, if you went to trial with a circumstantial brief of evidence and you're in front of a jury, murder trial, a lot of pressure on, high profile, and then through no fault of the police or anyone really, it's human error, a decimal point in the wrong point. The amount that the defence would make of that, how can we trust anything that the police have presented here when they've presented this? It's been shown, and I can just imagine the dramatics in the court. The paper would be in the hand, waving at the jury. It's wrong, it's false. So the thoroughness and that attention to the detail and little things. And I'm fascinated by the story of it. I didn't realise all the nuances with the way the investigation played out. But I know you speak highly of the team and proud of the team, and I can understand why, because that's the type of investigation that could slip through the cracks if you didn't get those things, like the botanist with the plant sample and different things that you picked up on. Running an investigation, overseeing an investigation of that, a high-profile investigation, it brings other pressures to you of that normally you don't associate with, the media interest. And once you've got the media interest, you've got the command's interest, whichever level that sits above you. You have politicians being involved. Was there a lot of that type of pressure on the investigation when you were working on that?
There was, in particular, some inaccurate reporting from a certain media person who had run a story and rang me to verify the story was accurate the next day, and said, the story's not accurate and don't bother ringing me again. So she's run up to the bosses uptown And I had a phone call saying that, we've got to include her, which I pushed back against, in saying that the majority of the media were brilliant. Your media is your best source of getting material, as you know. They're your best source to get material out, and you just want to work in closely and together with them. You can't tell them everything, and they know that.
Yeah.
But information feeding back from them was good. We did have an issue there where he was very closely aligned with a state politician, based on the Kenmore Chamber of Commerce. So dealing with that, I was very, very fortunate that I had an assistant commissioner above me who was 500% behind me and very, very supportive.
Yeah.
He managed a lot of the politics at a higher level, leaving us alone to do what we had to do. Yeah. And I think, as I said earlier in the piece, as a superintendent or inspector in charge of it, you've got to make sure your team are adequately resourced, they've got what they want, they need, and support them. And I was just very, very fortunate that I had a great team, and everyone was singing in the same direction. We briefed in the mornings, we briefed in the afternoons, we come up with some different ideas and different suggestions, and it worked effectively.
You've mentioned that a couple of times during the podcast, brief in the mornings, brief in the afternoons. I was, I won't say ridiculed, that's too strong, but probably the piss taken out of me how many briefings I'd have on investigations. But I think they're crucial in an investigation to make sure everyone knows that we're heading, what direction we're heading in. There's no misinformation missed. And when I've been involved in investigations, whether I'm leading it or just part of the team, when there's been mistakes done, invariably it's because the communication hasn't been there. We haven't had the briefings, and sometimes it's quite annoying. What the boss wants another briefing, does he? And you bring everyone into the room. Might only take 20 minutes, half an hour, but it was crucial to make sure everyone was on the same page and heading in the right direction. Would you agree with my thoughts on the importance of briefings?
100%. You've got to have, everyone has got to be well informed. They need to know exactly what's going on, because they go out and interview a witness at 6 o'clock that night and they're not aware of what's happened during the day. You're off track. So it's getting ahead of the game, making sure that everyone is fully aware. Even the use of a rolling video screen in the major incident room, updating where people can have a look at it, getting an idea what's going on. But those briefings are a very crucial part, in my view. Morning and afternoon, 7 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, for the sake of 20 minutes, it's 20 minutes worthwhile spending.
I agree wholeheartedly with you, Mark. The way this played out in court, trial, he pleaded not guilty, convicted, he appealed, and the appeal was overturned, the conviction stood. And I know that, it impacted on a lot of people, that type of crime, when it's a husband killing a wife. What's the washout from the whole investigation?
Yeah, you're right. There were examples of it seriously affecting police officers, which we dealt with and supported them on the way through. I think, I don't know, I've become very close to the family, to the girls in particular. There was a charity set up, the Alison Baden Clay Foundation, set up at the request of the parents afterwards, specifically looking at domestic violence and education towards that. So Alison's legacy still lives on that. They have we have a lunch every year. This year was the biggest, 400 people attended, and all the funding goes towards that.
How are Alison's children going now?
3 girls have turned out to be remarkable young ladies. They're very, very lucky to have the support of Alison's parents and close family and friends. And it's a real credit to everyone that's helped the girls, and it's a real credit to the girls how they've moved on. Very successful, very genuine, down-to-earth girls who, from the adversity they've been through, it's absolutely remarkable how they've turned out, and they should be extremely proud of themselves. They've actually got up at the last few lunches and spoken at the lunches, and it's an extremely creditable to Jeff and Priscilla and all the near family members, Vanessa and friends that have really supported the girls to get through this horrible time that they would have had. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The fact that they get on and the resilience that people that have had tragedies in their life like that come through. And what a nice in memory of Alison and tribute to Alison that the children that turned out like that. And it's just so difficult.
I think back in the day, the media, I've never struck it like that. 45 days. During the same time as the regional crime coordinator there, I had 3 other murders in the space of around Alison's, and the media was solely interested in Alison. You could do a media in relation to the other, and it was always came back to Alison because it was like the girl next door type of murder.
Yeah.
Brookfield area is a pretty affluential area with a lot of affluential people in Brisbane living in that area, and it's semi-rural. And I think talking to some of the media people, asking what do you think the interest was, and they just said because of the environment, who lived out there, and the girl next door type arrangement.
Yeah.
So it was very, very interesting.
It's a funny beast, the media, and I now work in it, but it always, I won't say fascinated, that's not the right word, but it always intrigued me, the type of investigations like that one, like the whole country knew about it. Other investigations I've been on, no one was interested, even though it's the same type of circumstances. I put it down to, Mark, I think it's just what people can identify with, and people might be able to relate with Alison for whatever reason, a woman with children, and she's disappeared and the husband's a suspect, and it makes people interested. But sadly, I say it from my experience, you don't have to agree with me, but sadly, the media attention also equates to the resources you tend to get on investigations, I've found as well. If there is a media attention on a particular investigation, you tend to get more resources than some of the other ones.
Yeah, I think that's correct. This one here, as I said, I was very fortunate to have a very supportive assistant commissioner above me. Yeah. And that was helpful coming to other resources, but once it got out, what we're looking at, people came forward. I remember public holidays, weekends, where police would just turn up saying, we want to search for Alison on their days off. That's what sort of happened. But getting back to your question, I think sometimes, I think sometimes you're right there that, the media attention in relation to some of the matters mightn't be there, which can affect the police numbers. And I think probably seeing that more and more now, like there's the number of murders that we're seeing. Years ago when you and I first joined, murder was on the front page of the paper. Now, sometimes it doesn't even make the paper, So.
No, that's right. It depends. But certainly a focus has been on domestic-related murders of recent times. And, in the chats I've had with you, you got the sense in the timing of it very much picked up after what happened with Alison. That was a domestic related murder. I want to get your thoughts on it, but you've got a fascinating insight into domestic violence. In that you oversaw a review into the thoughts of police officers attending domestic violence incidents. Do you want to just talk us through your role there and what you found?
Okay. That happened a couple of years back now, where the Queensland Government instituted a Royal Commission or Commission of Inquiry into domestic violence, and the response by the Queensland Police Service. I wasn't in the police at that stage, but they asked me if I would talk to police officers in Queensland, specifically looking at the culture of police towards domestic violence. I was very lucky in that I could talk to them that, wanting to interview operational frontline police that were dealing with it, not only in the southeast corner, but at the First Nations areas, the 1 and 2 people stations, to get a holistic view of the police response to domestic violence. So over the 4-week period, I interviewed 53 police from the rank of constable right up to, I think it was 2 inspectors, right across the state, and had a series of questions that were asked. Everyone was asked the same questions, and got a very good understanding of the effects of domestic violence in police. Now, back in that time, about 40% of calls to police were domestic violence related matters.
And
So
what years are we talking here, Mark? What
we're
time
talking
period?
2 years, 2022. This would have been
Okay.
so 40%, and this is prior to coercive hearings being legislated and coming in, a coercive control.
Yeah.
A lot of the police I spoke to, they were very committed with respect to domestic violence. There was a lot of frustrations about red tape, duplicity, and look, it was not surprising that one domestic violence matter could take 4 hours of an officer's shift to deal with.
Yeah.
So that's 4 hours that they're in there doing the paperwork, dealing with the matter, taking them off the road. I did a report and gave evidence at the DV Commission of Inquiry with a lot of the recommendations that the people I interviewed came out, frontline police. One of the big findings I had was they were concerned about duplicity. For example, if a person did not turn up to court for a DV matter, they had to go and find them and serve a notice of adjournment on them and more papers to get them before the court. And in areas of First Nation areas,
and when you say someone not turning up, the victim of the domestic violence?
No, sorry, the offender.
The offender. Okay.
The offender not turning up. So that itself had issues. You look at the First Nations areas up in Thursday Island, there's 40, 50 islands there where the offender could be. So police have got to try and find them.
Yeah.
One big thing I found, particularly in one area, shifts between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The crews would start at 10 p.m. at night, and there'd be a number of domestic violence matters queued up. So you had police going to areas attending to domestic violence, but then you also had supervisors who were going to domestic violence, one person out at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is a huge risk to the welfare of police because, as you know, domestic violence matters are very volatile. The one big thing was the use of support services. There are a lot of support services in Queensland, but some of the areas don't get the same level of support. For example, one area that I spoke to, a First Nation area, where the police rang a DV support network on call. It was on 24/7 for support, and they just said, look, we got nothing up there, get them to sleep at the police station, get them to sleep in the car. Recommendations were made in relation to, and I briefed Department of Premier about some of the findings from my report. And one recommendation was that they relook at the funding for all these domestic violence, the government funding for all these domestic violence organisations around the state, and trying to align a balance with 15 of the police districts to have at least one of those areas in the state working 24/7. And that suggestion came, it was one that I saw, but it also came from some of the police that the advantages they'd see of that is that they'd know the local geography, they'd know the local police, they could work with the police well, they'd know who the high-risk DV offenders are, and they could work together as a team.
So, Mark, in a practical sense, if that's implemented, what the recommendations, are we talking here that police, and I'm staggered by the fact that you said 40% of calls to the police station were domestic violence related, which is startling. The police get called, the car crew get called to a domestic violence situation, and the group that you're talking at, the specialists, not police officers, are you suggesting they should attend that location if they're on 24/7, attend the location with the police officers?
No, not necessarily. I think you've got categories. You've got the high-risk offenders, and you've got the first-time offenders and the recidivists, where police are going back constantly.
Right.
I think you would need it. Resources aren't unlimited. And I think there's got to be an approach. No, and I think, predominantly it's the high-risk offenders where, there may be an order in place against one, they join back up and it's still continuing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at the time, but an early referral so they can go and touch base with them, whether it's the next day. I think what we're looking at is just the ability for the Queensland Police attending a domestic at the back of Charleville, they can touch base with a DV person 24/7 that knows the area, that knows what safe accommodation is available to help in that stage. But then secondly, follow up with both parties involved to assist the police. Like, police aren't experts in human welfare. They go there, they keep the peace, they do their best they can in domestic violence matters. But there needs to be some other level where both the aggrieved and the respondent can go to for further education, can go to for conversations, and that's not the police.
Yeah, like the police shouldn't be filling the role of mediation between the two parties, and yeah, you got to
Yep.
sort it out. I understand what you're saying there, and I would imagine police, and you're the person that's interviewed them and get a sense of it, but I imagine they'd feel a lot of pressure with the domestic violence situations because of the attention that's on, and if they're dedicated police officers, you know the potential consequences. If there's a domestic situation, there's always a chance of something terrible happening.
One thing that I found really disturbing, Gary, was interviewing these police, that the level of fearfulness amongst the police attending to a domestic violence matter
Yeah,
and not dealing with it properly. Fearing disciplinary action, DV, if they make a decision at a DV, they've got to get, it might be a no DV, but they've got to get approval from their supervisor as a senior sergeant that it's a no DV. Now and then you've got a senior sergeant or sergeant that says, no, just do it as a DV to protect your neck because we don't want to discipline. So it's had that adverse effect as well. And the big thing that I never really saw evidence of police shying away from DV because they knew there's such an emphasis on it that it had to be
yeah,
done properly. This is prior to coercive control. So that 40% I gave before, coercive control legislation comes in. And there was some criticism in the inquiry of a number of fatal DV matters where the police hadn't responded appropriately and properly. My concern is with coercive control, there are levels that require investigation to establish that, yes, there has been, withholding of money, withholding of bank accounts and all this. That can't be done there and then. So how are police going to manage that level of scrutiny?
Well, you made an interesting point there, Mark, and I've been talking about coercive control a fair bit, and on the back of, and you know it from Queensland, that the Hannah Clark situation, and spoken to her parents, and they were very much pushing on coercive control, which were brought in New South Wales. I agree with it. I think it's a tool that police need, but I hadn't even, in all honesty, considered the investigation that would require to prove that, and whether general duties police have got the time to do those type of investigations. To me, looking at it from the outside, and it's a simple solution. You'd have experts in that area, specialist police, that coercive control, and a domestic unit within the local area command or squad that follow up that type of information, because there is a lot that you've got to do.
There certainly is, and as I said, you've got police going from DV to DV. They know that their domestic violence matters are banking up, and they know they want to get there to make sure that the people involved are safe.
Yeah,
that's when shortcuts happen. And that's unfortunate part of life. That's when things happen. There's a number of scenarios that police gave me, issues that they had and concerned about, what was occurring.
Yeah.
But look, my whole thing is police aren't the answer for everything. Domestic violence, mental health is a whole of community problem. A lot of domestic violence agencies are trying to start education. The Alison Bade and Clay one are, educating young kids at school.
Yeah,
that's fine. But you look at the generational DV. One police officer I interviewed, she remembers going to a domestic violence matter 16 years ago when mum and dad were fighting and the young kids were there. 16 years later, she's going to domestic violence where those young kids are the perpetrators of the domestic violence. So how do we break down that generational DV? How can the community work together to deal with this? Because, police have families in that as well. And I think the effect on, they're seeing at some of these DV matters can affect police in their own lives. I just think there has to be a different approach, and what that is, I'm not 100% certain, but it's got to involve a whole community response.
I think if you hang on to that, the whole community response, like the policing, you can't fix it. If they bring in tougher legislation, that is that going to solve the problem? Possibly not. It's you really need to approach it, and you need to circumvent it, prevent it. prevention is obviously better, and then bring in other services to help people navigate through that. But you speak to any police officer, and I can attest to that now. The amount of police I've had on the podcast and just in my general conversations with police I know mention domestics, and we all react the same way. Oh yeah, the pain of attending domestics. It's virtually what you cut your teeth on, and it's something that the potential ramifications are extreme. So it is something, and in this day and age, even more so than when I was attending domestics. So I can imagine that it does have a negative impact on the police involved in it.
It does, and look, I hope I haven't sort of made light of coercive control, because I look back at Alison's case, and there was extreme examples of coercive control there, which which has come to light now, and it's a critical thing that we have to deal with. And early intervention on coercive control may prevent more serious type arrangements.
I don't think you've made light on it, Mark. Like a lot of the stuff that you've said today on the show is a good common sense approach. I'm saying if anything, I was not naive, but hadn't considered how much work would go into coercive control. Having said that, I support it 100%, because I think the trouble is police, and you would have been there in at some stage in your career. We've all been in there. We walk into a house, no one's been assaulted. There's been an argument. You can feel the tension, you can feel the fear there, but there was nothing we can do. But with coercive control, potentially we could get to the bottom of that. If someone's manipulating and controlling someone, that might circumvent it. But you make a valid point, and when the politicians come in with the legislation, we've changed the legislation. We've got to be able to resource and educate police on how to use that legislation to its fullest effect.
Agree, and I think there has to be a multidisciplinary approach, not just a police approach.
Yeah.
Look, I can remember police don't like going to domestics. They're probably one of the biggest killers of police across history of policing.
Yeah.
I can remember as a 20-year-old going to a domestic violence matter where a woman rang up and said, "My husband's bashing me." We go down there, big fella. We got one handcuff on, a struggle. We've all ended up over the lounge chair. The next minute, the wife's there kicking us, "Leave him alone, leave him alone." Domestics are very, very volatile, and they've got to be handled professionally and carefully. And I think this day and age, as we've spoke before, with the different drugs and mental health, which wasn't as much back as the period I'm talking about, it's just an added risk and impose on police attending domestic violence.
Well, look, I'm glad we're talking about it, and the horrendous the consequences at the extreme where people have been murdered is just out of control. So at least the focus is on it, we've got to find a solution. We can't put up with it. If the problem's there, how are we going to change it? I like the way you approach things, Mark, on looking at solutions a little bit differently, and it's not. I get the sense that you appreciate things are all not black and white. I'm going to ask you, with the policing, 38 years in the policing, and you're still very much aware of what's going on now with the type of work you're doing and the interest that you have in it. Is it a career you would recommend to people?
100%. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Whilst things have changed a lot now, I think the camaraderie in the police, the diversity in what you will be attending, and I only spoke to a young fellow last night that's coming down for interviews on the weekend, and I said same thing to him. I said, "Mate, you're going to love it." I said, you get sick of one area, you can move to another. You're going to see the best and the worst in people. You're going to upskill yourself, but more than that, you're going to be working with a team and a group of people that will have your back. And I think that's one big thing that I liked about the police. I enjoyed going to work. I enjoyed the challenges. I enjoyed not knowing what I was going to be doing from day to day. So there's no monotony in it. And I enjoyed people I worked with and some of the people I dealt with. 100%, I think it's a great career.
I'm asked that question to all police I get on there, and I think we've probably got about a 99% success rate on saying they recommend it, because I thoroughly do, and it saddens me that police forces across the country are struggling to get resources at the moment, and yeah, if they want an interesting, challenging, rewarding life, it's there for you in policing. And yeah, I've just got to listen. I see the smile that comes on your face talking about aspects of your police career, and I see it time and time again. So hopefully the right people want to get involved.
It's like the suggestion come up earlier, Gary, about, do we have a national police service? The ability to transfer and things like that need to be brought to the table for, the right people to consider. And it's suggestions like that which, could increase recruitment and retention. I just think that things like that need to be brought to the table, and there needs to be a national discussion on how we recruit, how we retain police officers.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I've really enjoyed your chat. Good luck with your career at the moment. Sorry, before we go, what are you doing now? Because it seems like a kid in a candy store to me.
Look, I'm doing a little bit of work at Queensland Cricket at the moment, the integrity framework there, which is enjoyable. I love my cricket, and just a little bit of consultancy work out and about. So it keeps the mind active and keeps me out of the wife's hair, so it's good.
Well, you look like you're enjoying yourself and very relaxed. And yeah, in the prep for the podcast and reading the type of stuff and the stances you were taking, again, a common sense approach. So I want to thank you for coming on the I Catch Killers podcast. Thank you for the service to the people of Queensland and the broader areas in which you've worked. And yeah, keep on doing what you're doing.
Great. Thanks very much, Gary, and thanks for having me on. I think it's what you're doing is fantastic, bringing back what really happens behind the scenes to the grassroots. And I think it's really important for people to know that.
Thanks, Mark. I never got to work with Mark, but I know he'd be the type of cop I would like working with. He has a common sense approach, and he speaks his mind. And I've got to say, he raised, in terms of reducing crime, in particularly youth crime, some very, very interesting thoughts on how it could be approached. It's not working at the moment, so if we've got to have a discussion about trying to change things around. And I think Mark is well placed with 38 years' experience in the cops, and yeah, he has some good ideas.